Welcome back to the Small Market Podcast presented by Curveball Collectibles at 166 North Center Road in Saginaw, home of the best selection of sports cards and collectibles in the Great Lakes Bay region. Our guest tonight is former writer for the Detroit News, freelance writer for ESPN, and the Wall Street Journal, as well as New York Times best-selling author for several books, including his newest one, Let Them Lead, Unexpected Lessons in Leadership from America's Worst High School Hockey Team. How you doing tonight, John?
Doing very well, guys. Good to talk to you guys all the way back in Saginaw. I'm now up north, so a little farther away.
Mr. John U. Bacon. John, this book that your most recent book, it chronicles your experiences in coaching and creating leaders while turning around the Huron High School hockey team in Ann Arbor, Michigan. But what I found while reading this book is it's almost like a blueprint of success on many levels, not just for managers of employees, but almost for personal leadership and personal accountability. At what point, when you're looking back at your experience and say, this will make for a good book?
I thought probably at the end of our second year, my assistant coaches, who knew I was writing my third or second book at the time on the Walgreens drugstore, how about that, said, look, man, you got a book here. I thought maybe, but it took me 18 years to get to it from there. And the reason is I didn't know how to write it yet. I was too close to it. And also the players were still 17 or 18 years old. You have privacy issues. They didn't know, they hadn't really processed the whole experience yet either. So I'm glad we waited. But I knew pretty early on that we had one hell of a story.
That's, me and Hoffman were talking about it even before you come on. It could be a Disney movie, quite frankly. I mean, it's got all of the characteristics to it.
Well, I appreciate that. We might be closer to that than you think. I'm about halfway done with the screenplay with Jim Bernstein, who did D3 Mighty Ducks. He did Renaissance Man with Danny DeVito, Ruffian with Sam Shepard, and some others. And we're halfway done with the script. Doesn't mean anyone's bought it yet, but we're in the hunt. So, and he thought the same thing. It's scenes, got characters, and got a pretty amazing story behind it, and it's all true, which is always nicer.
Now, one of my favorite lines in the book is, I ruined your summer, now go out there and ruin their night. And I know you know what that line represents, but for like our listeners that haven't read the book and stuff, that line is like a pinnacle of the camaraderie and the relationships you've built with your players throughout the course of that summer. Can you speak a little bit about what that statement represents?
Sure, and it's fun when I do these interviews. You never know what people are going to pull out. So it's pretty neat that you pulled that one out. You're the first reviewer, podcaster, or interviewer I've talked to who's pulled that line out of all the lines. Of course, we had not, in fact, ruined their summer. We had a great time. I mean, it was hard. Everybody on the team threw up on the track at some point or other, including me, including my assistant coach, Mike Lappridge. But we did have fun, and we bonded, and they didn't have to come as voluntary. And not one player quit, amazingly. They kept coming. But the line still stuck. It's like, hey, man, we worked harder by far than that team across the hallway. And I know it was hard, and I know we all threw up, and we wanted to quit at various points, and none of you did. So if we can do that for 4 months, then damn it, for 15 minutes, go crush them. Make them pay for what they didn't do. And that was a very effective approach. I only had to do it 2 or 3 times a year. But that reminded them of the sacrifices they had made that the other team had not made. And when you know that you have sacrificed and the other team has not, you get a little ticked off, and you want that. Few things motivate like a chip on the shoulder, like disrespect, and that was an example of that. And the guys were all jacked up because they had 4 or 5 months of hard work behind them as motivation, and that made it a pretty easy thing to sell. I need 7 shifts out of all 3 lines, so let's go do it. And that was easy.
Awesome. Coach, and I'm going to call you Coach because you unbelievable. First of all, go River Rats. I think that's
go
awesome.
Rats, baby.
Yeah.
That's right.
Can you first, let's preface a little bit of this because Wataki and I were kind of trying to go through your timeline, and you're a busy man and you've done a lot of stuff. So it sounds like I want you to just correct me where I'm wrong. You kind of working for the Detroit News, covering Bo and Michigan football, and then this coaching job kind of comes up. Well, I mean, you've done coaching. What you coached the women's hockey team for U of M,
Right.
Then ended up coaching this to kind of fast forward a little bit, coaching the Huron River Rats. Then your books start. You start writing the books. Like you did kind of a collaboration with some of your colleagues, and then 2001 was your first one on your own. And from there on, you kind of start kind of like, closing the gap on the years, and like the last 5 years or so, you've had like a book a year, it's been pretty quick. So, did I get any of that wrong, or is that
I think you got it right. From 95 to 99, I worked at the Detroit News as a sports feature writer. That's a notch below columnist. It's a job that Wojo had before me, Bob Wanowski before me, and then he rose to columnist, which is usually how it works. Before it worked for me, I left in 99 to start writing books, as you point out. I've been writing books for basically 20 years since then. While writing books, I coached Huron for 4 years, from 2000 to 04, and then started teaching at Michigan from 06 to the present, basically. Haven't taught in 2 years since COVID, but it's been about a 15-year run or so.
Sure.
So I do those things on the side. And you guys did not make the common mistake. He's a professor at Michigan. I'm not. I'm a lecturer. I don't have a PhD. I don't have tenure, Lord knows, anything near it. And I make my living writing books, not by teaching. So
sure.
So yeah, the pay is usually pretty minimal. So if you're teaching or coaching, you better love it, because they're not going to pay you.
Understandable. So. Yeah. Now I'm kind of I'm fascinated by your relationship between you and the captain of this team, Mike Henry. Especially, like, you were very candid about your conversations and how things worked out between you and him, and you're like, it's kind of like hitting a brick wall trying to get through to this kid. And he's a very mature young man, but he was also very astute and type A about like what he wanted and what he wanted for the team, even being on a losing squad. But if you could talk about that a little bit, especially like the story that really got me. I was rereading it again earlier today. Was when Elmo, when Elmo overslept and he spent the night at Mike's, and they were voluntary practices, but you were like, why is he not here? Give him a call, Henry. Like why isn't he here? And both students were kind of pissed off at you. If you wouldn't mind talking about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to defend both those guys first, because they didn't want me to be the head coach.
Sure.
They didn't ask for it. I am anyway. They didn't ask for summer workouts, 4 months, and two in the summer, 2 in the fall, before trials even started. So in their defense, all that's true. Also, state law is very clear on this. I cannot make those workouts mandatory, and I didn't. If they want to do something else, they certainly could have. But the morning that Elmo slept in, this is the crack of noon we're talking about. These are noon workouts. And he was at Mike's house. So I said to Mike, that's, and Mike could have said, and Elmo could have said, well, they're voluntary, so, the heck with it. And they would have been right. But I thought there are a lot of reasons to not come to this workout. You've got a job, you play another sport, you got other interests, whatever else. But sleeping in, that can't be one of them. It's noon.
Yeah.
And sleeping in at the captain's house, and he's here, double no. That can't be
right.
The reason either. So I told Mike to call him, and he told him what's going on, and Elmo started heading down, not too far from Mike's house, to the high school. And then Mike hangs up and says, I said, so? He said, he was pissed. I said, at you? And that would have amazed me. He goes, no, at you. And that amazed me more. But Elmo ended up being one of our great success stories. So we always, as Adam was in the team, said he was probably the most beloved guy on the team. He cared for all the players, even though he's probably the most talented guy on that first team. He's probably the funniest guy on the team, but he needed some motivation, and we got there, and Elmo took it and ran. With Mike Henry, the wake-up call there was he had far more leadership ability than he was aware of. So I let him know that, look, I'm trying to get these guys going a certain degree, certain direction. And 2/3, 3/4 are, but a third probably aren't. And they're following you. Everyone's kind of following you. And you don't quite realize this. The charisma that you've got, the automatic leadership ability that you've got. And it was interesting that Mike, looking back on it, said he didn't see our conversation as a slap in the face or a wake-up call. It was a meeting of the minds where we got to work together on this, and you have more pull than you realize, so please pull that way. And if you pull that way, they're all coming. They're all coming, because Mike was just a natural, charismatic leader and still is. He now runs the USA Hockey facility in Plymouth, as well as the CompuWare Little League hockey program. He's a hell of a leader. No surprise. But those were two crucial conversations that first summer. Third was with Steve Beltran, one of the two starting goalies. Excellent goalie, great guy. But he also needed a correction from the year before, and we got that going. And then he became, I thought, a model citizen as well. But those three conversations, those three guys had more pull on the team than I did. And if they were not going to pull the right direction, we're going to be in trouble. And all three did. And look, my message to leaders out there is, you have to have a tough conversation. Have the damn thing. All right? Don't drag it out. Don't let it fester. And otherwise, your authority is going to erode very quickly. So you got to get to it. And we did. And in all three cases, they responded far better than I ever could have hoped. So those things paid off handsomely. And all three, by the way, I've been to their weddings in Arizona and Michigan and elsewhere. Those three remain three of my favorite guys. So it works out that way a lot.
Speaking of leadership, John, where do you attribute your ability to identify characteristics for leadership and just rules for leadership in life? Like, where all knowledge is external. You weren't just born being able to write this book and knowing these rules that are, when you go over this book, you're like, wow, this stuff really makes sense. Work hard, support your teammates, and how everything, like you say in that book, kind of just funnels to that. You can point that out anywhere in anything you do in life. I mean, I know you spent a lot of time covering U of M sports. You have a book, Bo's Lasting Lessons. Does that influence you at all in any of this, in your coaching and leadership stuff? Where does that all come from?
Sure, in that sense, I'm almost cheating, because how many guys who interviewed these coaches, Herb Brooks, John Wooden, Bo Schembechler, John Beeline, Carol Hutchins, I'd interviewed all those people many times before I ever sat down to write this book, talking to all these fantastic coaches. And then, of course, writing about them at various points, Detroit News, my book with Bo, of course. Although the book with Bo came after, actually, my experience coaching. But one reason why we got along is because I had some sense of what he was talking about. But I got to tell you, Joe Falls' book on Bo Schembechler back in '73, I think, it's called Man in Motion. That was my book report in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. All right, 6th grade, I had it down pretty well. And I knew what the hell I was talking about. And I didn't realize how deeply that was part of my DNA, if you will, until I did my book with Bo in '05 and '06, which came out in '07. You go back to that book, you realize, wow, I know that story, and I hadn't read the book in 20 years at least. It was amazing how much that had imprinted on me, 30 years, in the process. So you read that many books on leadership, you're around it that often, you're kind of swimming in those waters your whole life. So in that sense, I had a real advantage over other coaches, I think, that I was already in touch with this stuff. And look, how many guys can consult with Red Berenson or Bo Schembechler, or if you're about to play Trenton, the Soviets of our system, by far the most dominant team in the state, and you're the Americans, and over here on River Rats, I could actually call up Herb Brooks and say, Coach, Herb, they're the Soviets, we're the Americans. What do you do in this situation? And he would know.
Right, experience.
So not too many high school coaches have that kind of access.
Right on.
Yeah, I was.
So, short answer, by the way, I stole a ton of good ideas. That's the short answer.
When we were talking before our conversation with you, we were like, how much are we going to coach him into saying, into attributing Bo, So we got it out of you.
Fair amount, no question about it. And I also say, flip side, I coached from 2000 to 2004, and Bo and I wrote that book from 2005 to 2006. I could often, your job as a ghostwriter is to fill in the blanks. So I have to learn how to write like Bo and speak like Bo. And Bo passed away before we finished our first draft. So we finished the interviews, but not the actual writing process. So I had to fill in some blanks with the help of his former players and coaches and family members and so on. But I also knew already what worked and what didn't. We talked about goal setting in Bo's book, And some of those ideas I already knew from my own experience goal setting with the Huron River Rats. So both kind of informed each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, like Wataki here, I'm obsessed with the quotes from your book, and I couldn't get enough of you, so I started watching some of your TED Talks and stuff. But yeah, like work hard, support your teammates. That's just a line at first, and when I started reading Let Them Lead, I thought like, oh man, this is a self-help book, and the last book I'm gonna read is like a self-help book. But then I got through it, and I'm like, I get to about second or third chapter, I'm like, no, this is a story, man. This is a narrative. This is exactly what the kind of thing I like to read, and like especially by the third chapter, work hard and support your teammates made like all the sense in the world. But work hard, support your teammates. All of it is simple. None of it is easy. Like what Tucky said, I ruined your summer. Now go ruin their evening. As a fellow educator myself and a job coach, I like relate to all these things. I found myself having fantasy conversations while reading the book, like fantasy conversations in my head with you. So I think I'm going crazy, but they were healthy conversations. So yeah, super, super inspiring. And yeah, it went from like, oh, the dread of this is a self-help book to, no, this is a freaking Disney movie, and was just really excited about it. So this is one of my favorite books of yours. Can we switch gears to some of his other books and some of the Michigan stuff?
Would you be okay with that, John, for a little bit?
All right.
Okay.
Let me address that quickly though before we move on.
Yeah.
The Dearborn Public Schools bought 60 books. Let Them Lead. Educators, camp directors, athletic directors are buying this book by the box.
Yeah.
So the advice aspect, there's that. A few of the reviewers have hit upon, in fact, most of them have, that this book is trying to do two things at once, which you can fail doing either one of these things. One is the business leadership / self-help approach, which is this is how you do it, basically, based on my trial and error, as you've noticed in there. But also throughout there's a chronological story that threads the whole thing. So if you didn't care about the advice, if you're not a business leader, not a teacher, not a coach and camp director, then just follow the story. So we've got a pretty cool, inspirational, feel-good story based on the players, not on me, and what these guys did and how they came through, and as well as that advice. So you can go to this book for either one. And so far, both are kind of selling equally well, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, it's going to make a hell of a movie because, I mean, like you said,
let's hope.
Yeah, you said it before, like a sports movie, if it's about sports, then it's going to be boring. But if it's about...
It sucks.
Yeah, it sucks. But if it's about anything else, you're going to do fine, And all of my favorite sports movies, like Invincible and all that stuff, that they're not about sports. They're not about football or anything, They're about the life lessons.
It comes from my co-author on the script, and that's Jim Bernstein.
Yeah.
Who did E3 Mighty Ducks and Renaissance Man and so on. Mm-hmm. His line is, if a sports movie is about sports, it sucks. And the same applies to a sports book. If it's about sports, it sucks. Look, you can pick up the Bo book and not know anything about football and read it with pleasure. And I've gotten letters from Finland and you name it, Nassau guys who don't care about sports at all.
Yep.
I like to think even the football books, End Zone and so on, it's palace intrigue. It's not about just Michigan football. It's how a university functions.
Yeah. And
how people get along or don't, and what happens because of it. So, yeah. Yes, I hope that's the case. And so it's best to get two-tiered book advice as well as a story.
I was so inspired by it, late last week that I almost texted one of my old bosses and said, "Hey, you really need to read this book." But then I'm like, it's a little too much of a know-it-all kind of move. So I left it alone, but I enjoyed it that much and thought it was that inspirational, especially from a leadership state, because it's more about partnership, I think, than leadership. You're kind of putting the ball in their court, in your team's court, So
what's the title? The title is Let Them Lead.
Let Them Lead, yeah.
John Cooper gave a great line. John Cooper was actually coaching Lansing Catholic Central. His last year there was my first year at Ann Arbor Huron. And he had a great line. He said, bad teams, nobody leads. Good teams, coaches lead. And great teams, everybody leads. And so it's not an ego trip, and it's not, it's my way or the highway and so on. You're trying to put them in charge of their own program. That's the only way you can be assured it's going to run right, because if it's just you got to be there every day. And if you don't yell at all the kids, then it's not going to work. That can't work, man, long term.
Right.
It can't.
Absolutely.
They've got to be self-policing at some point, and they were.
Yeah. Now to shift gears a little bit to college football, this is where it gets a little bit tougher because we're kind of reaching back at some of your old books and stuff. But I just kind of want.
Hopefully, I'll remember.
Yeah. No. Well, I just want to know from kind of I guess a personal standpoint. I wanted to get this one in. What was Bo like the first time you met him?
First time I met him, I was 10. So he was rather intimidating.
Yeah,
Second time I met him, I was 31 at the Detroit News, 32 maybe. And we got along great, and he was very helpful to me. And, I wouldn't say we were peers, but we were both adults. When I was 10 years old, though, Glenn Williams, the old PA announcer at Yost, said, with Bo Schembechler, please meet Dan Deerdorf beneath the south stands, Bo Schembechler. We thought, there's no way in hell there are two guys named Bo here tonight, so got to be him. So Scott Childs, my best buddy, and I took our programs, marched down to meet the great man, the height of his powers. And when I approached him, I realized he's a lot bigger than I thought he was. I think he's small on the sidelines next to Bubba Paris and Jumbo Elliott. Bo was 6'1" and 185 pounds of blue twisted steel. So there's that. And I was like 4 foot whatever in 5th grade. So I see him and I got scared and I start walking away. But then he goes like this with the famous sausage fingers. And so I got to wait. And now I can't walk away and I can't walk towards him. I don't know what to do. And he finally interrupts his conversation with Deerdorf, one of his best friends, and says, "What can I do for you young men?" Whoa, it's even louder than I thought. And I kind of went, my program, I lost all my cool. He signed it very carefully. And then he said, "What's your name, young man?" And that's when my eyes got big and my brain went blank, and I thinking to myself, damn it, I know this one. And I can't think of my own name. So finally I spit out John, I think, and he laughed at that. He signs it to John, go blue, rolls it up, bonks me in the head, jams it in my chest, and says, "Thank you for supporting the Wolverines." And did it for Scott, my buddy, too. And now we're walking back. We're all full of ourselves. And everybody in our section wanted to know, did you get the autograph? Boom, check it out right there. But the lesson there, and it's in this book also, Let Them Lead, comes from my mom. Your character is what you do when you think no one's watching. There's no way in hell Bo had any idea that pipsqueak 10-year-old kid might someday be responsible for his last words on earth through the book. And trust me, with his 16 boxes of his papers, my parents' basement, all this stuff. If he had blown me off, though, there'd be no book. And I would never have pursued it. But he treated me, I was a pest. And he treated me like a king. And that is a lesson I have never, ever forgotten and never will. So there's my first meeting with Bo Schembechler.
Do you still have that autograph?
In my parents' house somewhere. I don't know where.
I had to ask.
We got a few big cardboard boxes I've got to go through sooner or later that we'll find it. So
right on. Yeah.
John, I'm a huge fan of the book 3 and Out. That is probably one of my favorite books that I've ever read, simply because of the fact. Thank you, Hoffman, with the props there.
No problem.
Simply because of the fact that I lived through everything that was there. You see the hat. I'm obviously a huge Michigan fan, and I can remember sitting there at a family Christmas when they hired Rich Rodriguez, and I told my cousin, I said, "This guy's a snake in the grass. I don't like him. The way he left West Virginia, and I never liked him." And so then for Christmas, I got this book, 3 and Out, a few years after he had moved on and stuff.
Right.
And I read that book, and I couldn't help but being like, I was one of those a-holes. I was one of those guys that never gave this man a chance. And your whole view of Lloyd Carr changes in that book and everything. While this is, and you followed him in real time to gather stuff for this information and stuff for this book, what was that like? Were you, as time goes on, were you starting to see the writing on the wall for him that he just wasn't getting a fair shake necessarily?
Yeah, it was almost, to use the now, tired cliche, the perfect storm. He made mistakes, certainly, on and off the field. Michigan made mistakes on and off the field. The media, the fan base, It was 3 years where not much was going right on almost any of those fronts, it seemed to me. In your defense, if I had not been on the inside, I would probably have had the exact same view that you and most of the fans had. He was not good at public relations. He was not good at media relations. The media is not always fair to him either, in my opinion. But what it was like on the inside, therefore, is I had a split screen like you have now, but
right.
I had the public Rich Rod and I had the private Rich Rod, and they were almost unrelated. And it's not like the public Rich Rod was false. He did say those things, and it was on TV and this and that. But when I'd be at a post-game press conference, he'd be doing very well, I thought, at the press conference for 10 or 15 minutes. And then he'd get asked some question, and he'd dive back into something he probably shouldn't have said. And I knew the second he said it, whether it's blaming the previous year or whatever else, the second he said it, I knew that's going to be the sound bite that appears on TV tonight and nothing else. And that's exactly what happened, of course. And there's also the PR aspect about the buyout from West Virginia, which got complicated naturally, and he had a gag order, basically, while West Virginia, Joe Manchin, governor of West Virginia at the time, who seems to be in the news quite a bit these days.
Yeah.
On a political front, he was just beating the hell out of him publicly because Rich had his hands tied behind his back. So there's that aspect, and then there's the team aspect. I came away such an admirer of the players on those teams. It's kind of like the soldiers in Vietnam. If you don't like the mission or General Westmoreland, okay, fine. I get it. But don't take it out on the soldiers. And that's how I felt about these guys, basically. If you didn't agree with the decisions being made at the top, don't take it out on David Molk or Mike Martin or Denard Robinson. These guys are giving their all, and they never stopped believing. Jeremy Chulo did a great job of this at his banquet speech. He's a walk-on player and all that. But he said we were always Michigan men. So the contrast between what I was seeing publicly and what I was seeing privately was, as I joke about that book, it wasn't easy to watch, it wasn't easy to write, and it's probably not easy to read. But it's not boring, that's for sure. And the drama that takes place, I still get letters about that book to this day, emails. But it's pretty amazing.
I believe it. Yeah, that's an amazing book. It's just an amazing story to get the inside view of stuff. I hate to go back and forth, but back to your first book, the first book we talked about, Let Them Lead. You state there that if a losing streak goes on too long, and I'm paraphrasing this, that you're not just fighting the other team, you're fighting history. If I take that to present day with Michigan and Ohio State, and this has been going on even before Jim Harbaugh, I hear that line in that book and I think to myself, that's what's going on right now. They're fighting history. This is more of not so much you don't have the same talent as them or the same coaching. It's almost a mental thing at this point. They're not even having fun out there because there is so much pressure from the outside just to win one football game. That particular one. What are your thoughts on it? You think that's kind of what they're dealing with right now?
You're dead on. And it's not only look, it's the end of the Lloyd Carr era. It's Rich Rodriguez going 0-3, Brady Hoke going 1-3, Harbaugh now 0-6 versus Ohio State 0-6, 0-5, I guess.
0-5, yep.
They skipped last year.
Yep.
So yes, you're now just not fighting Ohio State. You're fighting 2 decades of history, and you could see it with Bo, for example, in the decade of the '70s, that he's 0-5 in Rose Bowls. He's lost the Orange Bowl, the Gator Bowl also, so you're 0-7 overall. You're fighting all those things before John Wangler and Anthony Carter and company finally beat Washington for his first bowl victory. So it's happening here. It's not entirely Jim's fault, of course, Harbaugh's fault, because that train got rolling long before he showed up. Mm-hmm. I've long believed, though, based on that, if they won in 2016, if the call was different on the spot, which I call a toss-up, I can't tell either way.
Right.
And it's such an inexact science where you spot a ball anyway in a scrum. Who the hell can tell? But it could have gotten called the other way almost as easily, I would say. If you win that game, you're 1-1, and there's no freaking out, and you've already beaten Ohio State. There you go. Once Bo finally won a bowl game, he was 500. People forget this. He was 500 the rest of the decade in the 80s after starting out 0-7. So 0-7, 5-5. there you go. He had to win one.
Yep.
Michigan has got to win one. And where your quote comes from is Huron versus Pioneer. It had been, I think, 5 years since we had beaten them. We played them twice a year. That gets old. And the previous year, my second year at Huron, we outshot them and it's in the book, 35-15. We lose 4-3. We're ahead 3-0 the second time, and we tie 4-4. I mean, those are games. We outplayed them. We're the better team. We should have won. We just no breaks, and we freaked out. And it adds up. So once we finally beat them, we started winning games against them we probably shouldn't have won because we're calmed down now. We could get outshot and still win. That could never have happened before. So Michigan, they need to win one. That's all it is. They need to win one. Once they win one, then the voodoo's gone, and you're back to playing football instead of fighting 2 decades of history. And if you don't believe me, ask John Cooper.
Yeah,
great example.
Speaking to college coaches and especially Harbaugh, how much of an impact does a college coach really have on winning and losing? As far as I'm concerned, they're always fighting an uphill battle because they're always dealing with recruiting. That's 70% of their job. What am I missing? How come they get all the downhill stuff coming back at them? Especially this year, I've noticed Harbaugh's gotten none of the credit, and that was going to be kind of the crux of this season was, as soon as he starts losing, he's on a losing skid. We're going to be calling for his head. I mean, how much of an impact could a college coach really have? You got to be completely insane to want to take a job at an Ivy League or a Big Ten school. Am I crazy or what am I missing
you're not crazy,
here?
They are.
Okay.
I've been inside the Penn State locker room with Bill O'Brien in 2012 after the Sandusky and Joe Paterno the year before, of course. Crazy stuff. Yeah. I had pretty good access to Ohio State with Urban Meyer. Obviously, very good access with Rich Rodriguez, and then later on with Jim Harbaugh for 3 and out and then overtime. Northwestern with Pat Fitzgerald, not complete access by any means, but enough to know what's going on. I can make a very good case that all these coaches are overpaid compared to what a university is supposed to be. You should not make more than your president, for example, let alone 4 times more or 5 times more. And yet, I'll tell you flat out, if you'd offer me any of those jobs for that money, I would say no in a heart. I would run out of the room. If you saw these poor SOBs go through, I would not trade it for anything. And I think college is far harder than the NFL because NFL is hard too. And the margins are nothing in the NFL. But there's no recruiting, as you pointed out, which is almost a separate job. Yeah. You get all the highs and lows. When a 17-year-old blows you off or comes to your school, that's crazy. And that's nuts. And then, of course, this whole, you lose an NFL game. If you go 10-6, 10-7 now. If you go 10-6, you're probably a division champ and a playoff team. If you go the equivalent at Michigan, which is what, 9 and if you go 8-4, they want you fired. It's just brutal. You can't lose. And I've been on planes from Iowa, for example, team planes from Iowa back to Ann Arbor. Night game, you get home at 3 o'clock in the morning. That plane is a flying morgue. And I'd trade for a morgue. Absolutely. It's just a brutal existence, and I'd not trade with any of them. And how much control do you have? How much control does any coach have? One of my lines in that book is that you can say as a leader all you want, that you're in control. Yeah, you go ahead and think that if you want. But guess what? On game days, my joke was, on game days, we coaches wear shoes, you guys wear skates. It's up to you guys. Yeah. And if you win, you'll get all the credit, not me. I'll make sure of that. And those guys wear cleats, and Harbaugh wears, running shoes or whatever. Cleats too, in this case, I guess. Yeah. But the point is the same. It's like a conductor in an orchestra. Put your hands up, and you hope like hell they play, because your baton makes no sound. So you're at their mercy. Yeah. And honestly, and you're a teacher. Good teachers know that. Good teachers trust their students and rely on them. Whenever I hear a teacher talking about what a crappy class they have, I think, nope. So I can put a great teacher in that class, and within a month, they're going the right direction. Yeah. I've seen it. I've seen great teachers do that. not easy, and every class is different. But leadership still counts.
Yeah. Well, now you bring up a good point. In your book, I believe it's the preface, you say that after a lot of your speeches and stuff like that, your speaking engagements, people will come up to you and they'll say, we got them. My employees, they don't take ownership of things, and they complain about the employees and stuff. And employees nowadays, they complain about employers a lot and stuff. And there's this big disconnect, and it's almost like a generational thing. They always say this younger generation comes up, they don't take any ownership. They want constant praise. They want this and that. What do you think happened here with, I guess, society as a whole? I mean, I'm just kind of picking your brain here, kind of spitballing.
Sure. I see what they're talking about, and in some ways we are softer than we were 20 years ago, and we're softer, in 2000 than we were in, 1980 when I'm in high school.
Right.
So, look, there's a great quote, complaining about kids today, they don't stand up in the room when an elder enters, they're more interested in entertainment than hard work. And the guy who said that was Socrates. So this problem's been around for at least 2,000 years. So you can always say the current generation stinks, and it's not going anywhere. But having said that, the guys in my team, every one of them, they're on the worst team in America at that point. They're 0, 22, and 3, and yet none of them quit. We didn't cut anybody from those teams, and those are the guys who turned the team around. So, and in my class at Michigan when I teach or Northwestern or Miami of Ohio, we've had 5 late papers out of, I think, 4,000 chances, 2,000 students with 2 papers each. And 5 late papers, like within 5 minutes. It just doesn't happen. So when I hear about today's generation, man, pay, power, prestige, all worked on me, my generation, doesn't work anymore. You need to give them a sense of mission, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and you need to let them lead. If you do those things, they will absolutely exceed all your expectations. But you have to have the courage to lay it out there.
Absolutely. John, I got 2 more questions for you, then we'll let you go. I know we've kept you way longer than we should have. So
I'm enjoying the conversation, and you guys have done your homework.
Absolutely.
By the way, oh yeah, and you're good at this. Wataki, by the way, sounds like a nickname. Of course, you realize that, but then so does bacon. So.
Yep, absolutely. So going back to the coaching thing real quick, as far as college coaching, I've been pondering this for years, and just toyed with asking you about this week. I am fascinated by the idea of taking Joe Pa's statue down at Penn State, as if he were like Saddam Hussein or something. Now, I'm not a Penn State fan, but does that solve anything? I mean, is that really necessary? And they kind of even in the media, kind of absolved him a little bit. He probably didn't know too much about what was going on there with that whole scandal. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Entirely mixed and tortured. How's that?
Fair enough.
And first of all, I'm not sure if we should be putting statues up of football coaches, because right there, it's a different message to me than naming a building. Naming a building means you're honoring the contributions that the person made towards that building. It's not quite the same thing as literally putting them on a pedestal. You're claiming more, I think, with the statue. That could be my interpretation and not shared by others. That's my take. But then, of course, the flip side is, so in the first place, I'd rather they didn't have statues of Bo or Paterno or other guys as well. And Bo would not have wanted one, by the way. I'm very sure of that. I'm as sure as I can be of that without putting words in his mouth. We never discussed it, obviously. So, but in Paterno's case, obviously the Sandusky stuff is horrible. Goes without saying. Apparently he had, as he said himself near his death, he wished he had done more. And that's a very honest, I think, and human reaction, and we all wish he had done more. Sandusky was no longer a Penn State employee. At least we're not Penn State students. This makes it less tragic. It's more in many, many cases. How culpable was Joe Paterno? It's a shade of gray compared to what people want, which is he's totally innocent or he's totally guilty. I don't buy either one. I think it's more nuanced than that, more difficult to tease out. Also, as far as his relationship with Penn State, as I make clear in Fourth and Long, the book mainly about Penn State, nobody raised more money for Penn State, not the athletics, with the university and the libraries and everything else than Joe Paterno did. Joe Paterno had more to do with Penn State becoming a world-class university, a member of the AAU, the Association of American Universities, only 62 in North America, and they were nowhere near it when he signed on in the 60s, nowhere close. That no one did more for that university than he did. So you pull the statue away, and yeah, did he screw up? Yes, he did. Was it tragic? Undeniably. Did he still do more for Penn State than anybody else? Yeah, probably. I'm sorry, that's a complicated history. And keeping the statue up or down does not answer that question. Yeah. Our reaction needs to be more nuanced, more sophisticated, I think. And that's why I'm not a fan of statues in the first place, because automatically you're making it black and white.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, so there's your very long answer for your very short question.
That's fine.
But it's a tough one. And if you see what I wrote about Fielding Yost on the Bacon blog on johnnubacon.com, Google that and Yost, it'll come up. And likewise, the Schembeckler, Dr. Anderson questions.
Oh yeah,
They're tough questions, and they don't have easy answers.
Yeah, you said Yost used to get picked up by the police in Ann Arbor all the time and stuff. So he got picked up by the police late in his life when he had Alzheimer's. He had some form of dementia. Yeah, it was just sad.
He was wandering around. He didn't know where he was going.
It reminds us we're all humans. We get to sometimes we get to a point beyond our own control and stuff. But my last question is: now when you got the Huron River Rats, this was a little just almost pre-social media. I'm sure you've gotten this question before. Do you think you would have been able to handle these kids with the same amount of ease or motivate them? Because, social media is just, it's detrimental. It's it's almost the bane of, millennials and
sure.
You kind of won me over with the argument of millennials. You've made me a fan of them now, but, I feel like that makes them worser people. I don't know.
I will say this. I'm glad I went to high school and college without social media, and I'm glad I coached and largely taught without it. Of course, teaching in Michigan comes up on Twitter and Facebook and so on, and luckily 99% positive, but you still get some stuff. I think everything is harder right now on social media except for self-promotion.
Right. Distribution is free.
Exactly. Everyone's now working in a fishbowl. I think it's harder to be truly authentic. It's harder to be tough, because someone's going to interpret that the wrong way. I don't envy that aspect of teaching, leadership, coaching, and so on for anybody today. Today Harbaugh had a comment about he was asked a question about refereeing, a very matter-of-fact one, and has Big Ten gotten back to you about refereeing? He said they had, and he answered the question truthfully, and then you get blasted on social media.
Oh, yeah.
As a whiner and blah, 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 blah. The question came to him.
Yeah.
And his answer was factual, and Big Ten apologized for a call. It doesn't mean Michigan State did not deserve to win the game, and that's one thing I really hate about social media. It's not possible on social media to hold two thoughts in your head at once. It can be true, right? That the call was controversial, and it was. Fox News, Joel Collette and those guys said, no, they got it wrong. The Big Ten said they got it wrong. And yet, at the same time, Michigan State deserved to win the game. They made the big plays when they had to, and those calls are going to happen. Look, that call was clearly, extremely tough to see, and either way, and likewise the call in 2016 at Ohio State. It's going to be that close. You're taking your chances. And you got to win by more than that. There's a whole truth to it. So
absolutely.
So it's hard. Jim can't win, and he doesn't as far as social media goes.
Right.
I'll say that he probably hasn't done a whole hell of a lot to endear himself to the media. Although he's been very fair with me, very direct, and when I've needed help, he's given it to me. And we don't always agree. In fairness, and likewise the refs. The only coach I could think of that refs disliked more than Bo was Jim, and they don't like him. I know this.
Well, I've heard
I don't know
that.
how much that impacts the actual refereeing. I really can't say. There's no way to prove it.
Yeah.
But Bo did not get too many breaks, I don't think, because he held out a lot of refs.
Well, Coach,
I don't like that.
Coach, you've been more than generous with your time, Mr. Bacon. We really appreciate it.
Please call me John. Nobody calls me Mr. Bacon.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. We could talk to you all night, and Watucky here stopped me from asking you any questions about the Spark. I wanted to ask you questions about Cirque du Soleil. I had so many more questions, but he told me I wasn't allowed.
Although I get royalties in that book. That book did pretty well, actually. Not quite a bestseller, but yes, I spent right after I finished coaching, 2005. I spent about 6 months with Cirque du Soleil. That was a blast. Yeah. In Montreal, Las Vegas, and Paris. If you get an assignment like that, take it. My advice. That was a pure pleasure, and the book has done pretty well, actually.
It sounds like fun. That's probably going to be my next Johnny Bacon book that I speed read.
You'll read that over coffee. It'll take you 3 hours.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Coach Bacon. The books, we got all kinds of books. I've got my hands full, and only these 3 right now because that's all I could fit in my hands. But yeah, over time, you've got 13 books. Watucky's favorite, 3 and Out. He got me to read this book. This is how he got me started on you. And I'll turn him this way. And of course, your latest book, Let Them Lead, which is going to be a movie. This book is awesome. So, thanks again, Coach. You have a good rest of your evening up north. Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, guys.
All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Take care.